There has to be some common sense.
Yes, sir. They have the car stopped at 10th and Ranch Microbizer.
We still don't know who pulled the trigger. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Police Off the Cuff Real Crime Stories. I'm your host, retired NYPD Sergeant Bill Cannon, a 27-year veteran of the NYPD. Guys, I just returned back to New York. As you can see, the black background instead of the white background from Florida. What a difference in the weather. Oh, my God. I hit the ground in Westchester, and I was like, whoa. Cold and rainy and a little bit nasty. It was raining in Florida, too. It just wasn't that cold. Anyway, it's good to be back. Hello, everyone. Some new developments, or maybe we consider it breaking news in the Gilgo case, the Rex Heuermann case. Little flyer up on the screen. Rex Heuermann's wife, Asa Ellerup, wants his guns returned to her. As we recalled early in this case, when they conducted the search warrant on the home, a lot of news stations published that, he had this torture room, which it wasn't. It was like a safe room, and there was all different types of numbers of guns. And anyway, he had a hell of a lot of guns. And according to the New York Times, he had 279 guns in a walk-in vault. That's a lot of guns, and not all of them were registered. It's very difficult to get the correct answer as to how many guns were registered, how many were unregistered, what type of guns were they, shotguns, handguns. The breakdown was I don't think they ever really put the breakdown, but according to the New York Times, Rex Heuermann, the Long Island architect charged in the Gilgo Beach serial case, kept 279 weapons in his rundown home, most of them in a basement vault big enough to walk into. At a news conference outside Mr. Heuermann's ranch house, where the authorities have been collecting evidence since the arrest, the Suffolk County District Attorney Raymond Tierney said that his team was wrapping up its search after more than a week. So this is a couple of months ago that they conducted this search where they recovered all of these weapons. And almost immediately after the search warrant and the arrest was completed, Rex Heuermann's wife filed for divorce. Was the fact that she filed for divorce, was that on the advice of an attorney, or was that because she was so disgusted to hear what her husband was being charged with, and that she had no idea who this 6'6", 280, 300-pound ogre, had no idea who this guy was? She lived with him for, 25 to 30 years. So the story today, and what's breaking in the news, is that she wants these guns returned to her. And I would imagine the reason she wants them returned to her, I don't think she's an avid hunter. I think she wants the cash value of them, potentially to sell them. But I don't think any judge worth his salt would okay the return of these guns before a proper investigation can be completed relative to we don't know, and we don't think these guns had anything to do with any of the crimes, but we don't know. That is the key right there. A proper investigation hasn't been completed, and that could actually take a couple of years. And if they were going to test each and every one of these guns, they would have to fire each and every one of these guns into a ballistics tank and have a sample of the ballistics to compare against any crimes that they might find. At this point, I don't know if they're even going to do that. However, the fact that Rex Heuermann's wife is asking uh, to have these guns returned, I just don't. I don't think any judge worth his salt would do that. I think that's such a long shot. News Nation commented on it. They had an attorney uh, that was their expert on this. Let's hear what he has to say.
Trial attorney Dante Mills to talk about what we can expect. Thank you for being with us. Two hearings this week. What will be discussed and what might come out of these meetings with both sets of attorneys and the judge?
So these meetings, good morning. These meetings are pretrial hearings that will talk about the evidence that's going to be used during the trial. There was also a request by Max Heuermann's attorneys to return the family, to return the guns to the families. So they're making this claim and they're saying that he's innocent, that he didn't do this, and that the weapons that were taken were not used in this crime. That's their argument, and that they should be returned to the family. So the judge is going to decide that, as well as some evidentiary hearings as far as what can and will be heard during a trial process.
So the request for the guns, is that a reasonable request? I mean, given the fact that they may not have been used, do you expect the judge to grant that?
So we have to see what.
You know, this attorney, his face said everything. He made a face, but then he answered a little bit differently than the face he made. His face said no, but then he answered sort of in a neutral way.
What evidence they presented to show that it's separate from Max Heuermann himself. So if these are guns that were used by other people in the family or purchased by other people in the family just because they were in the house when the search of the house was done, does not mean that the government gets to keep them. But if the government is saying we have reason to believe that a gun was used, and for example, if there's a certain type of gun or shell casing or bullet hole that was found that matches the caliber of one of those guns or something like that, then that does give the judge the ability to have those guns held as investigation until this process is over. But you know, it's the court doesn't want to give outright discretion to the investigating body. So example, if a police officer raids your home and finds anything, they can't just take it. It has to be tied to the crime. And that's what the judge is going to review. If there's evidence.
Unless, counselor, it's contraband and it's in plain view, then it doesn't have to be on the warrant. So contraband is an item that is illegal in itself. For example, drugs or potentially a firearm that's unregistered. That could be considered contraband. And in that sense, it would not have to be listed on the warrant. It could be removed based on the plain view doctrine.
Evidence that ties it to the crime, makes it a part of the investigation, then they will keep it. But if not, then the family does have the right to get it back.
He's been in court a couple of times. Do we expect in this week's court appearances that he will show his face and be brought into court?
I don't believe he's going to be brought into court this week. These are preliminary hearings. Generally, the court wants clients there. If anything can happen that can actually have the ability to have your case dismissed or impact your case in the moment. These are hearings where they'll discuss scheduling, some lighter motions and things like that. So the defendant will not necessarily be brought down for that. It is a process and it's expensive to have prisoners transported back and forth to court. So especially after COVID, they're reducing the amount of times that a prisoner is brought to court only when there's going to be impact on his case, not if they're just scheduling things or handling motions that won't impact the outcome.
There is so much evidence, according to prosecutors in this case, against him, starting with the DNA. We saw his truck a moment ago on the screen. What will be the challenges for his defense?
The challenge is going to be highlighting. They're going to have to highlight that there's no direct evidence. So DNA is important, but it doesn't stand alone tell you what happened because DNA can't tell time. So he can say in his defense, well, yes, he engaged with this person before, but not at the time of the murder. Yes, he even solicited her. At some point, she was in his vehicle, but that does not mean she was in his vehicle the day she was killed. So DNA doesn't tell time. There's some restrictions to DNA evidence, and there's no direct evidence that we know of. There's no eyewitness to say we saw them together when, the day that they were murdered or anything like that. So there's going to be challenges for the prosecution, even though they do have a lot of evidence in their favor. There are some avenues for the defense to say you can't prove beyond a reasonable doubt that our client committed these murders because no one saw it happen. So much time has passed. And even though you have some things like DNA, that's not enough to remove all doubt.
And we know he's being investigated for the death of a fourth woman and potentially other cold cases. If they're able to tie him based on evidence to any of those, would that be included in any pending trial?
So if you have some kind of constant, procedure or routine that he used, if you're looking at the serial killer monogram where you're saying this is how he killed his victims, allegedly, then that can be discussed because you talk about the practice of it. But if there's individual cases, then my argument as a defense attorney would be he can only be tried for one case at a time.
Thank you for watching.
So, folks, basically, what this is about is the wife wants his guns back. And as I said, I don't believe she's a hunter. I think that she wants them back for the monetary value of these guns. But as I said, I don't see any judge worth his salt that would release these 279 guns. And how about, in addition, many of them are unregistered guns, potentially illegal guns. So how can you return something that's potentially illegal till it's verified and checked and determine whether or not it's a legal gun or an illegal gun? So that's also a factor. So this hearing, I think, is mute in that way. There's no judge in my mind that's going to say, oh, yes, give the wife all of those guns back. And look, we sympathize with Rex Heuermann's wife, Asa Ellerup. Apparently, according to Suffolk County Police Commissioner Rodney Harrison, she had no involvement in this at all. She knew nothing about her husband's activities. That's a sort of a real euphemism for what he was doing. And she filed for divorce right away. So she was left basically without any source of income. I don't believe she worked, and I believe Rex was the breadwinner in that family. So she's trying to get money in some way to support herself and her son, I believe. I don't know if the daughter actually worked for Rex. So you can see why she wants these firearms, because there's a pretty large monetary value on these guns. I'm going to play this. This is Rex Heuermann's attorney.
He's had contact with his wife, yes.
In what way?
And family members. I don't think she's visited yet, obviously, because she doesn't want to be ambushed by the press. So she hasn't visited him at the jail yet. No.
All right, that's the attorney for the accused Long Island serial killer, who is still presumed innocent, but for the sake of...
Now, of course, guys, this is back in August, so we're just playing this to show the wife and the home that the search warrant was conducted on.
How are you holding up?
What you see, right? It is what it is.
How's your children doing?
Not going to go for that one. Not going there.
Have you spoken to your husband?
And I'm not going there either. That's already been, his lawyer's already answered that question.
How are you getting through the day with media and with all the questions? I know it must be tough.
Moment by moment, not hour by hour, moment by moment.
Obviously, the aftermath has been excruciating for the family of the accused killer. Here's what the New York Post is now reporting on this. The estranged wife of the accused Long Island serial killer is seeking to get all of his legally owned guns returned to her, arguing they are marital property worth hundreds of.
So, folks, that's the key, legally owned guns. So, because many of those 279 guns perhaps were owned illegally, no permits for them, unregistered. So, absolutely, the police would never return those guns back to anyone under any circumstances. However, as I said earlier, I don't see how a judge can release any of these guns without vetting the potential future cases that could be coming in. What if he releases these firearms? It turns out one of them was used in a homicide. Again, I don't see any judge releasing any of these guns.
Lives that they were living, right? So you've got an accused serial killer, and he's got a wife, and he's got a family, he's got a house. How could someone potentially balance that, Dr. Judy Huh?
Well, Vinny, we see some extreme compartmentalization with some of these serial killers, and this is not the first time that we've seen a serial killer that has a kind of a very ho-hum type of typical normative civilian life, and somehow they're able to still commit these egregious crimes in this other side of their life.
Well, folks, we learned again, and if you choose to believe that Rex Heuermann lived a double or triple life: the life of a husband, father, the life of a business owner in Manhattan, and the life of what he's being charged with, being the Long Island serial killer and the alleged Long Island serial killer. So yes, multiple lives, more than one, more than two, perhaps three.
And that extreme compartmentalization also speaks to why sometimes when you look at these serial killers and you think about how can they just not even have those emotions, those reactions that most of us might, the lack of empathy that we see with some of these individuals, that compartmentalization allows them to do it. It's almost like this one part of their brain just shuts off so that they can do all of this, and then they go back to their civilian life. And sometimes it's also designed that way, meaning they're trying to put on this typical life, be a productive member of the community so that it wouldn't come to the attention of law enforcement or anybody that they live in or have relationships with.
Siobhan Scott, that's I want to pick up on that point. Do you think a serial killer can actually love their spouse?
I think they attach in perhaps a way that's different than the way the rest of us attach. But
I always thought that people that were sadistic psychopathology, and that was, of course, he's a sadistic psychopath, that they wouldn't have a conscience. If you studied Psychology 101, Freud, the id, the ego, and the superego, right? And the superego was the conscience. Wouldn't someone like Rex Heuermann, to be able to live these multiple lives, wouldn't he need to be without a conscience, without a superego, in order to be able to do the things that he's been accused of doing, of course, allegedly doing, and then live this life of a married husband with two grown children living in the household, being a business owner in Manhattan, and then having this real dark side that was uncovered in this investigation.
They certainly can seemingly connect. They can go through the motions of love. They can be nurturing to their children, but it all goes back to this very unusual way they compartmentalize.
July 27th, 2005, in the Wichita Eagle. I want to read this. This is relative to the BTK serial killer. Citing emotional stress, Paula Rader, Dennis Rader's wife at the time, requested and was granted an emergency divorce from the BTK serial killer Tuesday. She had been married to Dennis Rader for 34 years. Sedgwick County District Judge Eric Yost signed the papers the same day they were filed, waiving the 60-day waiting period required for most divorces. Then in 2019, Cosmopolitan did an article following up with her.
Many psychologists, many people that have watched this case, have studied this case, have compared Rex Heuermann to Dennis Rader, to the BTK killer. Certain similarities, certain psychological similarities. But again, Dennis Rader, his case is over with. Rex Heuermann is charged. He's the alleged. He's innocent till proven guilty, as I'm always reminded to keep saying, and I do keep saying it. And he alleges, and Rex Heuermann's attorney says he swears he's innocent. But some of the evidence that the police have against him is completely horrific and paints a picture of a psychotic, sadistic serial killer who enjoys the act of hurting people and then inflicting pain on others. So that's his personality. So even though, again, we say he's the alleged Long Island serial killer, they have come up with certain evidence that is quite disturbing.
Her new last name, Dietz, has never given a public statement about her husband or his crimes. She didn't go to any of his hearings, and she's never written to him or visited him in prison. Dr. Gary Brucato, 34 years of marriage. How are you able to keep a secret to that level, of that depth, of that darkness that was in this man's life, that he's, for 34 years, those of us who are married, you know what a marriage is, two become one. How do you think that happened over the course of 34 years? He's able to keep this deep, deep, dark secret.
Well, first of all, when you're dealing with people who compartmentalize, one of the things you want to realize is that they probably have a very black and white idea about the same type of person. So, for example, a woman, in the eyes of an individual who commits serious sexual homicide, might be kind of pure or elevated, or someone that you'd never heard a hair on their head, but then one could go out and sexually assault victims, torture them, kill them with no more compunction than one would have killing a housefly. And this often has its origins in relationships that the person had in youth with certain female people that they knew, whether it was a mother, women that they knew throughout their lifespan, etc. But the second point that's important to bear in mind is there's something of a misnomer about psychopathic people, that they lack empathy. What people really mean when they say that is that they lack compassion. Empathy has to do with the capacity to read a person's face and understand the emotions they probably feel. And because these individuals can do that, they can pretend that they feel compassion towards people, but then they don't. So, for example, a person could go into a shopping mall and see a little boy that's become detached from his mother, read that his face is sad and frightened, offer him help, and then take him off somewhere and kill him with no compassion. And so what I think is, with some of these people that have these split ideas about certain kinds of people, the family can become this island of purity, this place where people are good and the women out in the rest of the world are terrible, or something like that. And then there's this ability to kind of do what you should do, to act like someone that loves because you can feel what people are feeling. You just don't care about it.
Dr. Judy Ho, now looking at the other side of the coin, right? For the spouses.
You know, I have said early on in this case that perhaps Asa Ellerup was not, she was not involved in this. And that comes right from Suffolk County Police Commissioner Rodney Harrison. He felt that all from their investigation uncovered that she had nothing to do with this. But I still think that she's got some, let's put it this way, issues, that she was able to live with this man and stay married to this man. I don't buy the fact that he showed no signs. I mean, when they look at his computer, that shows some signs of the sites that he was searching on his computer, shows signs of a demented, mentally deranged, psychopathic, sexual sadist. And to not show any signs of that outwardly, again, I am not a PhD in psychology, but I've seen a lot of crazy people in my life. In my career as a homicide sergeant, my career with the NYPD, and you get a sixth sense, as they say, into reading people. And that's, you know, we have all kinds of people in these cases and other cases that they read body language. When you're a police officer or an anti-crime officer or a detective, you learn how to read body language almost as good as anyone else, because you know why? Because it might save your life. To be able to read someone's body language before they do something which could cost you your life. So in these instances, when these psychologists talk about reading body language and predicting behavior based on certain things, I think there's a science to it, but it's not an exact science. It's just like we've spoken about profilers. And the profiler that I had on with Bobby Chacon, his last name is Clemente, and he was tremendous. And he went to the FBI profiling school, and he predicted 12 years ago, and you could read it in the New York Times, exactly the personality that the Gilgo Beach serial killer was going to be. He predicted Rex Heuermann almost to a T. And you can go in the New York Times. It was, I believe, 12 years ago that he made those predictions. And you will be shocked at how accurate he was. And he was on our show, and he was talking about many of the traits that this killer would have. Dr. Joni Johnston, also on our show, another profiler that can predict. But again, they can just predict to a certain level. We've seen also profilers fail in certain cases. The Beltway sniper, to me, I always point to that one. That was the biggest one that I thought they failed at their profile. They profiled Roger Still. Yes, Jim Clemente knows his stuff. Now that the writer's strike is over, Jim Clemente and Bobby Chacon were going back to work writing for those crime shows that they write for. Yes, he was amazing, but again, it's a science that's not, well, I don't believe there's any science that's exact, because as long as they use that word hypothesis, which we all know from Science 101 is an educated guess, but they were pretty damn accurate.
34 years she's married to this man, and at the moment all of this becomes public, I mean, it's over. I mean, she never contacts him. She doesn't talk about him. She doesn't go to court. Nothing. Completely I mean, that has to be such a shock to your system. 34 years of marriage, and then all of a sudden you realize, I don't even know who this guy is.
Absolutely, Vinny. And most of these spouses, that's what they say. They say, I had no idea. Really, there were no warning signs. So not only are you living with that shock and just the all of a sudden having been cut off from somebody who you thought you loved and was your family, it's also the questioning of your own decision making, going over conversations in your head, going over different moments in your marriage and wondering, did I miss something? Did I not catch something? So it really causes a post-traumatic stress reaction oftentimes for these spouses. And then, of course, the isolation and alienation, because no matter how many good deeds you did and no matter how well respected you were in the community, now you're kind of forever known as the spouse of this serial killer, the spouse of this criminal. And even if you're completely innocent, this is the black mark that is on you now. And you might lose a huge sense of the community that you had before, or feel like you can't go out without having to defend yourself or thinking about what people might be saying about you. So I think, of course, the lives of the spouses are way turned upside down. And sometimes the attention is not on them in a very good way at this very critical time where they need the most help and the most love from their community.
Folks, I think that in this case, the Gilgo Beach case, Rex Heuermann, I think we could safely say that. Well, I had some inside information on the house, and of course, they sued, or they're suing the Suffolk County Police Department and the Nassau County Police Department for the damage that was done to their house vis-a-vis the search warrant. But I had some inside information that house was so disgusting, so filthy. Cluttered was a kind word. It was like a hoarder's paradise that the detectives couldn't stay in there for more than a couple of hours at a time. And they had to get out to get air so they could breathe fresh air. It was so disgusting. So I say, and I may get a lot of hate for this, but I'm going to say it anyway, that you have to be mentally ill to live in a house like that. I believe that. If you live in a cluttered, filthy, disgusting house, you're missing some brain cells, And in my opinion, if you allow yourself and you just disregard all of those things and live in this dirty, disgusting, filthy home, I think that you got some problems. And potentially the wife of Rex Heuermann, Asa Ellerup, I think she's probably got some issues too, that they could look at that house. When you look at that house, even from outside, this is the home of an architect. And it clearly was the most disgusting home on that block. People, even the press was sort of kind, saying, oh, it was sort of run down. It sort of spoke volumes to who owned it. When you look at a home like that, and again, you can hate me for judging in this way, but I'm going to say it anyway. When you look at a home like that, what does that tell you about the people that live there? Does it say that they're mentally stable? Does it say that they're healthy? Or does it say that perhaps they're missing a few brain cells? And in my mind, it says to me that they are definitely missing a few brain cells. And so when we have the wife of Rex Heuermann now trying to get a hold of his guns because she has no money, Wild Z Pony, especially compared to all the other homes on the block, Massapequa Park, thank you, Wild Z Pony, great point. Massapequa Park is an upper middle class neighborhood. So what do you think the people that not that it's important what the people on the block think about you, but if you looked at that house and you lived in, say, in an upper middle class neighborhood like Massapequa Park, what would you think about that house? What would you think about the person that lived in that house? would you think they were perfectly normal? That everything was okay? That, oh, he owns a business in the city, but he just doesn't care to take care of his house? You know, I think, look, anyone that lives in suburbia knows that your neighbors' homes have an effect on you, how they take care of their home, how their home looks, when they mow their lawn, when they use one of those evil blowers that drive you out of your mind when someone uses a blower and it's on a day that you're trying to enjoy your home and enjoy your backyard and people are making all kinds of noise. I'm sort of getting off topic, but what I'm talking about is Rex Heuermann's home sort of gave a few hints of who he was. And if the other family members are okay living in a home like that, then perhaps they have some mental issues themselves. This is about some of the evidence that they removed.
Last month of the murders of 3 women. The victims' bodies were found on Gilgo Beach more than a decade ago. He's also the prime suspect, in the death of a 4th person.
CBS News national correspondent Errol Barnett has been following the case. He joins us from outside that courthouse. Errol, talk to us about the scene. I mean, what happened today? What are we learning also from his attorney, who we just heard from a few minutes ago?
That's right. Hey there, Lilia and Ed. CBS News was inside the courtroom. I was sitting front row as Rex Heuermann stood before a judge. And really, for the first time, we all got to hear the prosecution's evidence against Heuermann as the discovery phase begins. They're handing over all of their evidence to the defense. They describe it as 8 terabytes of data, files, forms, images, video. They say it equates to thousands of pages of documents and almost 100 hours of surveillance footage, which includes the last moments on camera from one of the victims outside a motel room the night she died some 13 years ago. What was noteworthy to me was Heuermann's demeanor. He was wearing a dark charcoal blazer, had a blue collared shirt underneath, wearing khaki pants. At no point did he turn back to the gallery where the media was seated, as well as some of the victims' relatives, we understand, who are not speaking to the press. He was wearing khaki pants, his hands were cuffed, and he was in the room for a short amount of time, maybe 10 minutes, before being removed and then taken back to the jail, which is connected to the courthouse under a tunnelway beneath where I'm standing now. What's clear is that the prosecution feels they have an overwhelming amount of evidence, and according to Heuermann's court-appointed lawyer, who hasn't seen any of this evidence yet, he says his client is an innocent man.
So given that that attorney has been handed several terabytes worth of information, what do we know might come next in this case? How much?
Sharon Moore, the house is their home, period. It is what they have left and what they can afford. No, it's not. It shows how people live. It shows who they are. It shows their psychology. It shows perhaps they're mentally ill if they live in a place. Look, I told you I had some police that I know that were in that house, and they told me it was unbelievably disgusting, that they couldn't even stay in it. It smelled so horrible. So if you think that's a home and that's okay, and that doesn't speak upon the people that live there, I'm sorry. To me, it does. And I think that it says that these people have issues. And of course, everyone has said that, Asa Ellerup knew nothing about living with this serial killer for 20. And I said, yes, she does. Because look at the house. That speaks volumes. That doesn't mean she knew her husband was a serial killer. But what it does mean, it means that she perhaps ignored things, because she ignored this house. This house was a pigsty. It was a hoarder's paradise. As I said, the police were very kind when they said to the press, it's cluttered. And usually if you're a cop, the word cluttered means it's a shithole. And that's what it was. They could not stay in there for more than an hour. They had to take breaks to get the hell out of the house because it was so disgusting. Look, I've been in places like that. When I was on patrol as a sergeant, I went into this house of a hoarder, and the garbage was 6 or 7 feet high. It was over, I'm 6'1". It was over my head. And I could tell when I walked into the apartment that someone was dead in the apartment, because you could smell the smell of death was in the apartment. We had to climb like mountain climbers over this garbage, and we found the occupant of the apartment dead in a corner. And just to get in there, I don't even remember how EMS got the stretcher in there in order to take this woman out of there. So you may think, and I'm giving you the reality of it. I'm not going to sugarcoat this. Their house was a disaster. And if you don't think that says something about a human being that lived like that, then I'm sorry, then you're not really understanding the true crime world or the real crime world, the psyche of a serial killer and the people that live with this guy.
How much longer until we see progress or forward momentum?
Well, in the short term, we know that the next conference hearing is about 8 weeks away. That's September 27th. But here on the steps of the courthouse, just a short time ago, I threw questions both at the district attorney, Ray Tierney, who's leading this case, and Michael Brown, the lawyer for Heuermann, who appeared separately. And it's as if they're singing, of course, as you might imagine, from two completely different song sheets. The prosecutor says they continue to interview witnesses. The grand jury continues to meet. And that this case, I mean, remember, these alleged murders, we know these women lost their lives, happened some 13 years ago. He says it will take time before presenting all of this and allowing the defense to sift through everything. Michael Brown, on the other hand, the lawyer representing Heuermann, says that his client tells him he didn't do it. I pressed him on that. I said, how do you explain the online searches, the burner phones, which located Heuermann at the scene of the crimes when the young women lost their lives, as well as the DNA evidence, which links one of the bodies to Heuermann's wife? And the lawyer told me that he hasn't sifted through any of this evidence yet. In fact, he was quite combative with some members of the press and saying, have you seen the evidence? Do you trust what the government says? But he clearly hasn't looked through that evidence and can't make the case, which is why I said to him, well, how do you know your client?
You know, folks, no attorney, the defense attorney for ex-Heuermann, is not going to try the case in the press. So yes, is there a lot of evidence? Yeah, but he's going to answer that in a court of law, not in the court of journalists asking him questions. And you can understand why an attorney would get upset at a journalist questioning him about the case. And how are you going to argue against this evidence? How are you going to argue against that evidence? Patty Martin, I can't see a photo of Heuermann without thinking scary, ugly ogre and feel terrible for the victims seeing that face before they died. Yes, he is a scary looking individual. Tammy Donaldson, excuse me. The part I worry about even more than how filthy it is, couldn't it collapse? It's so unstable, potentially very dangerous. You know, Tammy, you're right. You see those beams that seemingly are holding up the house. And yeah, that seems a little scary, right? Was that really those beams necessary, or would that house have collapsed? I don't know. Only Rex Heuermann, the architect, knows. He's an architect, right? The amazing Tiff, I think he chose her because of whatever personality traits she may have. Mental illness, cultural differences, or however you want to word it. I think her ability to ignore is what he liked. The amazing Tiff, you're very perceptive. I agree with you 100%. The fact that she was able to disregard certain horrific things that most of us would never disregard is maybe why he stayed with her. Kat's real life mystic tarot. I believe she is broke. It's possible to have a good income and still be broke with tax debt and credit card debt, money mismanagement, but it doesn't cost to clean up. Emotional despair and apathy. Kat's real life mystic tarot. You are absolutely correct. Folks, this is Police Off the Cuff, real crime stories. If you like real crime, true crime from a police perspective, then you're in the right place. And if you're not subscribed to us, go on our YouTube, hit that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up, ring that bell, and join the Police Off the Cuff YouTube family. And if you're not subscribed to us, or if you're brand new today, put a 2 in the chat so I can identify you and say, hey, I want to see you subscribe. Now you won't put a 2 in the chat. You're afraid I'll be hunting you down like I used to do when I was a homicide sergeant, you know. But anyway, so yes, this we started this whole show talking about Oh, I forgot. If we also have a Patreon, folks, with 3 different levels. You want to support us financially, and we have a YouTube channel membership. We count it 5 different levels, and you see the folks in the green font. They're part of our YouTube channel members, our friends, our family, our subscribers, and they help support this channel. So the show started with us talking about that Rex Heuermann's wife, Asa Ellerup, wants his guns. Because she needs the money. But in a hearing, I believe there is no way that the judge is going to give those guns back to anyone until the investigation is over and the police will say, we don't need them. We don't need them anymore. We've cleared, we've tested them. That could take years, though. Roseanne, I find it amazing as an RN that went into homes like that, how hoarders could find everything under even 6 inches of trash. Heck, I would take my scrubs off in the garage and throw them in the trash. You know, Roseanne, I've been in apartments also where, you know, there were roaches the size of cats in these apartments. I actually quoted that one time too. Someone gave us a civilian complaint report because we executed a search warrant in the house and they thought we should have cleaned up their house after we left, and that you don't do that. And I had said to the CCRB investigators, Civilian Complaint Review Board, I said to them what I just said now. Are you kidding me? If anything, we fixed that house. That house was disgusting. There were roaches the size of cats, and even the CCRB investigator got a little bit of laugh out of that. So, yeah, so it's, again, the evidence in this case. Let's go back to this gentleman here.
Didn't do it. He said, my client said that he didn't. I mean, let's not understate as well how much these murders, there were 11 remains found in a similar area around Gilgo Beach 13 years ago. It's transfixed this part of the country. And so to get some form of closure is something people welcome. But the wife of Heuermann has filed for divorce. She says her children, adult children, are suffering. She's upset at the way the house has been effectively turned upside down as they've scoured for evidence. I asked the prosecutor, what do you make of some reports suggesting she may take legal action? He says she's welcome to take whatever legal action she takes, she's interested in, but he is very confident in the case that he has set forth. So we'll hear more specifically in about 8 weeks.
Errol, you just mentioned the 11 bodies that were found or remains in this area. I'm just curious. I mean, I know that the DA has already talked about the possibility that he could be a suspect in all of them. Any indication that they're ready to expand naming him as a suspect beyond these first 4?
It's a great question. In fact, we anticipated that maybe we would hear in today's conference some type of indication that either more charges are coming or that he may be linked to additional murders. We haven't heard that yet. In fact, I pressed the district attorney and said, did anything that you uncovered over those 12 days in the house turn up in this batch of evidence that you're now handing over? And he said, actually, no, we're still looking through all of that evidence. It really gives you a sense of the tip of the iceberg that we've all been given a glimpse of when it comes to the evidence they have. That suggests they have significantly more physical evidence and testimony from witnesses and other people who are giving a bit of a character profile on Heuermann than is actually being presented. So no, not at this stage. Heuermann being charged with allegedly killing 3 of the women and is the lead suspect in a 4th death. But as far as those other murders, they remain to this day unsolved.
Errol?
You know, folks, we have yet to find out. The police haven't released it. The district attorney's office hasn't released it. In the search warrant of Rex Heuermann's house, where we saw that they took out an amazing amount of, and we don't know if it's evidence. They don't know if it's evidence because there could be things that they removed that they're trying to identify. Because there also could be victims that have yet to be identified yet, that have yet to be assigned or that Rex Heuermann is a suspect in. So MS, I think Heuermann's wife has a serious case of depression. That's probably why the house was not clean, cluttered, etc. Enjoying your show from Sweden. You segued right into that. Well, thank you very much for liking the show. But yeah, I think that there's some, you hear that word used, maybe overused, issues. You've got issues. See, she definitely has some issues. So getting back to the evidence that was removed from that house. Remember, we've heard the term a million times during this case of a trophy or of a souvenir. And if you recall, two of the biggest pieces of evidence, and of course on the screen are the Gilgo 4. And we always want to mention the names of the victims in this case that we know specifically are tied to Rex Heuermann. Maureen Brainerd Barnes, 25 years old, reporting missing from Norwich, Connecticut in July 2007. So when we see how far back this goes, Melissa Bartolome, 24, reported missing from the Bronx, July 12th, 2009. Amberlynn Costello, last seen in North Babylon, Long Island, September 2010. And Megan Waterman, 22, last seen in Hauppauge, Long Island. Two of the biggest pieces of evidence that I hope and pray that they recovered were the actual cell phones belonging to Maureen Brainerd Barnes and Melissa Bartolome. Because he used those phones to taunt their family members. He used their actual cell phones. So could you imagine that in this search warrant, if they actually recovered those phones, how powerful of evidence that would be in the case against Rex Heuermann? Tremendously powerful evidence. And we don't know. We don't know. How about other things when we talk about trophies? Could there be women's underwear, shoes, jewelry, pocketbooks, things like that? Potentially things that haven't yet been identified or connected to potentially another victim. We don't know. They haven't publicized anything that they recovered evidentiary-wise in that house. Lutina B, totally agree his wife has deep emotional problems. Hoarding is a mental illness. I was furious when she benefited from donations regarding the condition of her home. I'm guessing it was worse. Well, I'm not going to tell you who told me that, but yeah, the house was horrific. It was beyond disgusting. It was just a place a human being would not live. You would not live in. I mean, I used to go into some apartments and you'd leave there and you want to jump right in the shower and rip your suit off and have it dry cleaned immediately and change into different clothes. It was so. I've been in places like that, and anyone that's been a cop has been in places like that. So we know with what we speak about, because we're talking about being in locations like this. So this was earlier on in the case also when Rex Heuermann's wife, Asa Ellerup, filed for divorce. Let's hear a little bit of this.
Since we last spoke, what stands out to you the most in this very moment?
Well, the most recent thing within the last hour, Rex Heuermann's wife, this was announced, she has filed for divorce, and it is uncontested. These are reports from Suffolk County here on Long Island. But other than that, it's been pretty revelatory. There's been information about his sort of timeshare property in Vegas. Obviously, there's the sex work connection there. There's also South Carolina, where he and his brother own some parcels of property that supposedly has a lot of sort of junk on it, including the green Chevy Avalanche, which was seen by a witness ages ago. So that car is actually there, from what I'm understanding. They're still taking things out of his house. His lawn is still dug up. They took a doll in a glass case, a child's.
Obviously, folks, this is back when they did the search warrant. We're just going over this because this is when this is backing up when she filed for divorce. And now it's all interconnected that they're asking for the guns. Someone in the chat just asked about would they give the guns to anyone without a permit. The guns, if not legally returned at some point to the family, they would be destroyed. The police department doesn't sell guns. They would melt them down and destroy the guns. At least that's what the NYPD does. And in a case like this, as long as the guns weren't connected to any crime, and they weren't legally owned, or if they could legally return them to the family, they would do so. And then the big word is legally. But if not, they would destroy them. That's the way guns are dealt with in this day and age.
Size doll, that was kind of a big one. There hasn't been much since then on that. However, there is also information that they took some mirrors out of his house. And they're also looking into other properties that he may own. When I was there, the day they went into his house, they were talking about how he owned a home in New Jersey. And also there was, the ties to the South Carolina properties. So that ended up, bearing fruit. But there's also a lot of police work going on across the entire country. A lot of organizations are now liaising together with the task force here in New York, which is the FBI, the Suffolk County Police, Nassau County Police, and the state troopers. So now that his DNA is in the system, it's, entirely likely that he could be linked to more things that have gone on across the country, which was kind of the theory.
Yeah, Robert, you're touching on a lot of really great points here. Let's first just start with that news that's coming down now that his wife has filed for divorce. What do we know about their marriage? Does this come as a surprise?
I don't think it comes as much of a surprise. When you learn news like that, I know his family had reacted pretty, deplorably in regards to learning about what he had been accused of. They were obviously
Might have Asa Ellerup also been advised to immediately file for divorce because the victims' families could file civil suits against her and Rex and take their home. So it's not just that she's horrified as to what happened. She's protecting herself, her financial position, by protecting her ownership. I would imagine she has ownership of that home. So by filing for divorce, that will distance herself from Rex Heuermann, and that potentially, and I'm not an attorney, could protect her from civil suits that are bound to be coming any day now.
disgusted and dismayed, but it's not a surprise. It's not a surprise. It's his second marriage, and she has children that she needs to sort of focus on and take care of. I believe their son might be special needs. So, that's the priority right now. He's got to deal with his own problems. So I think it makes sense that the wife would cut ties.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about some of those other points.
Folks, someone's saying in the chat that Asa does not own the home. The home is owned by Rex. That's right. He either bought it or inherited it from his family. However, when you're married in the state of New York, and I'm not an attorney, I'm not a divorce attorney, I believe that based on the law, you would probably own half of that house, whether your name was on it or not. And again, if there's any attorneys in the chat, let me know whether I'm right or wrong. So if you're living with someone for 25 or 30 years and your name, you live in the home that they own, and you're married and your name's not on the mortgage, I still believe if the divorce occurs, you would get at least half of that house. Alien Barbie 51, I don't know. I get it. There is legal protection, but I think her home environment is a strong indicator that she too was abused in ways that aren't so obvious to the average citizen. Alien Barbie, I 100% agree with you. Yeah, that's for sure. She was a beaten down woman. I have no doubt of that.
Points as well, specifically the number of weapons that were found in his basement. You also mentioned the doll, bizarre discovery there. Your thoughts on what was uncovered in the basement?
Well, he's supposedly a duck hunter. So he has a lot of weapons. I think there was like 90, 92, something like that. But also at the same time, like that was something that was said years ago as well, that we should be.
You know, according to the New York Times, he had 279 guns. All right. So this was early on in the investigation. It was undetermined at that point, the number of firearms they recovered in that safe room. However, according to the New York Times, who I think prides himself in some form of accuracy, that he owned 279 guns.
Be looking at duck hunters. And nothing ever really came of it. A lot of people kind of ran with other theories, myself included, thinking that it was something else entirely. But yeah, it turns out that was actually true. He was a duck hunter. Also, the burlap was not actually burlap. It was sort of like stuff that a hunter would use to cover themselves. So again, the duck hunting connection there. Even though they did say at the time, there is something printed on the burlap, and that turned out to be camouflage as opposed to like a logo for a company or something like that. But 92 weapons, and the mirrors, the doll. He obviously has a.
You know, folks, a lot of you guys in the chat are doubting that Rex Heuermann was a duck hunter, and you're right. He does not look like what you would imagine the typical duck hunter to look like. But I don't know what the typical duck hunter looks like, but it certainly, in my mind, wouldn't look like Rex Heuermann. But you're right. So, but again, everyone's saying, is that confirmed that he was a duck hunter? Or did he just own 279 guns and that was his excuse? Marianne Knapp, if I recall right, he may have paid his mom cash, and if there's no mortgage, she's out of luck. I don't know if any of that's true, guys. I don't know if you guys are lawyers or not, that they're giving this advice. I really think that even if you're not legally married, there's something common law comes into place also. And I think that she would own half of that house. Again, if there's an attorney in the chat, let me know if I'm right or if I'm wrong, because I think that it's not that easy that you could just get divorced and say, oh, my wife's getting nothing. I don't think that's the law.
The predilection for young women who are small in stature, the women that, the GB4, the GB3 as of now, they think that the fourth, Maureen Brainerd Barnes, is going to be connected. I saw that before, but he clearly has a taste for young, small framed women. And I think a lot of people are reading into this doll as potentially that it is in a glass case. We were talking about it on a thing the other night, a true crime sort of symposium, about whether or not this has anything to do with, maybe there are allegations that we haven't even heard yet about him regarding children or something like that, but we just don't know for sure. And information is coming out more and more, it seems, every single day. It's pretty remarkable how much has come out since, the other day, since I guess Thursday or Friday.
Folks, this case right from the very beginning, well, not from the beginning, going back to 2010 when a lot of these cases occurred, but going back to when the Gilgo Beach Task Force was established and going back to when Rex was arrested, that 32-page bail application document that was put out by the Suffolk County District Attorney is what we would describe as a treasure trove of information, of evidence that they have against Rex Heuermann. And if you don't have it and you follow this case, you could pull it up online. And I would advise everyone to pull it up. Just put Suffolk County District Attorney bail application regarding Rex Heuermann. And it gives you all of the information that you might not know, because it's very complicated, very convoluted. Legal-minded friends, thank you so much, Karen. New York courts must divide the marital property equitably. That means fairly, considering the circumstances of the case and of the parties involved, but it does not necessarily mean equally. And Karen happens to be an attorney from across the pond, but she's an attorney. There is no statutory requirement of a 50-50 split of marital marital property. Karen, thank you so much. Very eloquently spoken, better than this former NYPD police sergeant could explain it, since I am not an attorney, but very eloquently described. And thank you for that. Marianne Knapp, done deal. So many have prenups now, and at one point, if they had assets, she should have gotten represented. Yeah, I mean, look, there is a methodology to what's going on. Of course, after the police had enforced the search warrant, had served the search warrant on their home, immediately two attorneys popped up out of nowhere that represented Asa Ellerup, Rex Heuermann's wife, and they were saying they intended to file suit against the police department because they destroyed the house, they destroyed the tub, they destroyed this, they destroyed that. So they do have representation, and these cases usually are taken on a contingency basis. So the lawyers don't get paid unless they hit pay dirt, unless they score in the lawsuit, because the people have no money. They're indigent. So the attorney will take the case on a contingency basis. And I believe that's what occurred in this instance.
Friday.
Right. And especially as I start looking into other states too, this could just keep getting deeper and deeper. There's also been talk about potential trophies that he may have kept. Is there anything new on this?
Not that I've seen. It wouldn't surprise me. However, there are things that would make sense for him to hold on to. I personally would look at the cell phones as trophies. Why wouldn't one get rid of a burner phone or get rid of a victim's cell phone? That's a trophy to me. It's a very modern trophy. It's not like holding onto a piece of clothing or a lock of hair or something like you see in the movie.
Folks, a trophy obviously is something that a killer would take to relive the feeling of the occurrence of that's what he does, and to relive it, to have this trophy. And a souvenir, they differentiated between a trophy and a souvenir. A souvenir is also something that he would take from the victim and keep it as a keepsake, sort of. So potentially all of those things could have been inside. Jonathan Rubin, I didn't say that the divorce case was taken on a contingency. I said the lawsuit against the Nassau County Police and the Suffolk County Police for wrecking the house, as alleged by the attorneys, they would take that case on a contingency. I never said anything about the divorce being taken on a contingency. Jeff M. checking in from Pittsburgh. Bill, hope all is well. What do you think the chance of at some point down the road one of his guns gets connected to a missing woman found shot and killed? Jeff M., that is the fear that I think the judge should have, and that is the fear and the reason why the judge would not release these guns. It's so easy for the family and for the defense attorney to say, they're not used in a crime, they're not this. How did they know? It's so early in this investigation to say that. And of course, they're going to say that. But would a judge bet his reputation, bet his job on that? Oh, yes, I'm going to release them because there's no evidence. Oh, it's only been 2 months since they've recovered these guns. How do you know? They haven't had a chance to someone I just said something funny in the chat. Choosy heretics choose Carnation Revolution now. What does a typical duck hunter look like? Elmer Fudd? I don't know if choosy heretics choose Carnation Revolution now. I don't know if everyone in the chat knows who Elmer Fudd was. I used to watch that cartoon when I was a kid. So when I saw it, I got a little chuckle out of it. Thank you for making me laugh. Margaret Hearn, attorneys must believe she has or will have assets either in present or down line with sale of property and book deals, etc. In New York State has the Son of Sam law, and I don't know if it applies to the families of a serial killer. However, it applies to the killer. And that law was made so that serial killers cannot benefit by their crimes by writing a book, a movie, something like that. So that's the law in New York State. And again, I don't know if that applies to the family members, but it surely applies to the perpetrator. Folks, if you're looking for a great attorney in the New York City metropolitan area, then Joe Murray is your man. Joe's a retired NYPD police officer and a fantastic defense attorney. You can get a hold of Joe on his cell phone at 718-514-3855. Email him at joe@jmurray-law.com or go on his website, jmurray-law.com. Not only is Joe a fantastic attorney, but he's also a huge supporter of the Police Off the Cuff podcast, and he's helped us throughout the years by supporting us, and that really helps us. Suz Esquire, if it was his property prior to the marriage and it was kept separate, it is probably his property. Not a New York attorney, but I think that is true. A lot depends on how the deeds, etc., were filed. Suz Esquire, thank you very much. I think that you guys are probably more accurate than I am on this topic, but we're concerned again about the evidence recovered in this home.
It's a very modern thing to hold on to, but I would not be surprised at all if, there is more in there. And also, they raided his storage locker. Now, there was a medical examiner at that storage locker, which was in Amityville, Long Island, so not super far from his home in Massapequa, within 10 minutes, about an 8-minute drive. It's never a good thing when there's a medical examiner called to a storage facility. So again, not a whole lot has been released on that yet, but that did happen.
Right, and he's been charged now in 3 of the murders, linked to potentially a 4th. But what about the other remains that were found? If police aren't linking them to Heuermann yet, do you think they might have some other leads they're looking into?
I saw an interview with the sheriff, the sheriff of Suffolk County, and he was very confident that all of them are connected to Rex Heuermann, which obviously is hopefully a relief in some ways, that this indicates that there is not another party responsible for those other unfortunate victims. He seemed remarkably confident, and I can only put my faith in, the sheriff.
He's referring to Sheriff Errol Toulon, who I actually had on our show. I was extremely impressed with Errol Toulon. What a hell of a nice guy. And I don't think he's involved in that much of the investigation. I think they got the sheriff involved, the sheriff of Suffolk County, because they have a program in the Suffolk County jail whereby they interview a lot of the escorts that get incarcerated, and they pick their brains and they ask them questions about what's going on in your world, because it's a very small world. And as intelligence in regards to this investigation, it was extremely, extremely important. And as I said, Errol Toulon is aces in my book. And it was a partnership, I believe, that came out of Rodney Harrison establishing the Gilgo Beach Task Force with the Suffolk County detectives, the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office, the FBI, the New York State Police, and the Suffolk County Sheriff's Office. As well, if you want to list one more partner, the Nassau County Police. They were also involved in this case, although very few people mention the Nassau County Police, but at least 2 of the victims were recovered in Nassau County.
Something else you need to know tonight. We're getting a firsthand account of the alleged Long Island serial killer's life behind bars. Rex Heuermann being held without bond after being charged with 3 of the Gilgo Beach murders. He remains the prime suspect in a 4th woman's death. And today, the Suffolk County Sheriff told CNN about how Heuermann spends his days and who's come to visit the alleged killer.
Mr. Heuermann did have one visitor, obviously someone that's known to him because he's denied 2 or 3 visits already. We don't know the extent of the conversation. I do know that it lasted less than the hour time that we allot for visits whenever anyone's visiting someone in our custody. I do not know how the conversation went. I do not know how this individual was contacted to even think to request the visits. You know, in the first couple of days or even that first week or two that he was in our custody, he was basically laying on his bed. He was sleeping a lot. You know, now he's participating in recreation, which means he walks around the yard. He's by himself. He has the option to play basketball, at least shoot a basketball hoop. He can do pull-ups, dips, sit-ups, push-ups, which he doesn't do. He just walks around the yard.
I don't see Rex Heuermann doing any sit-ups, pull-ups, dips. Maybe he'd shoot a basketball, but I don't see him doing any of those exercises.
Participates in religious services. He goes to a library where he's able to take out books, which he's been reading. It seems like he's reading a lot now. If there's any missing sex workers or any bodies that have been recovered over the last several years that can now be attributed to Mr. Heuermann, or even what's going on in Las Vegas. And so, you know, once that DNA has been analyzed and it's distributed to those jurisdictions and possibly other jurisdictions across the Eastern Seaboard where Mr. Heuermann may or may not have been, we can now see whether he is a direct participant in any crimes in those jurisdictions.
We're also learning that Heuermann is no longer on suicide watch. He's expected back in court on September 27th for a conference hearing. And of course, Court TV will be there for it all.
So very, very interesting. Very interesting. And that is Sheriff Errol Toulon. Great guy. As I said, we had him on our show. Not easy to get these folks on your show. You have to have the right connect. And apparently we got the right connect, and Errol came on the show. He'd heard about the Police Off the Cuff podcast, and he really had a good time, actually. He enjoyed coming on the show. We enjoyed having him on the show. As I said, what a hell of a nice guy. He's actually Dr. Toulon, PhD, takes his job very seriously, worked for years at Rikers Island, and got this job, was appointed, I guess, to this job. And he runs some very innovative programs out of the Suffolk County Jail that have helped many people, because the goal, of course, is not to have people as frequent flyers in your jail. You know, have people that keep coming back. That's not the goal. The goal is to have people never return, and that is what Errol Toulon's goal is. And through his programs and reaching out to the community, he's doing one hell of a job in the Suffolk County Jail. I want to play a little bit. Mary Murphy did just such an exemplary job on this case. I just want to play a little bit of her report here.
4 were discovered here in the brush off Ocean Parkway in December 2010. Now police say they finally found the murderer.
He was living a double life. He had a wife, he had 2 kids, nice job as an architect.
And Rex Heuermann, 59, probably never expected to be surrounded by cops in Midtown as he left work on a Thursday evening.
Rex, did you do it?
Still wearing the same khakis, the towering suspect was accused of being the Gilgo Beach, Long Island serial killer known as Lisk, who eluded law enforcement for more than a dozen years.
But you were aware that he was patronizing other sex workers?
It certainly appeared as though he was, yes.
While investigators in white Tyvek suits immediately descended on Heuermann's lifelong home in Massapequa Park, armed with search warrants, the suspect was initially charged with murdering 3 of the Gilgo 4, Megan Waterman, Melissa Barthelemy, and Amber Costello, all petite online escorts who were discovered dead in 2010 with another escort, Maureen Brainerd Barnes, in the brush off Ocean Parkway.
The only thing I can tell you that he did say as he was in tears was, "I didn't do this."
3 of the sex workers were bound in burlap, and Heuermann was named the prime suspect in the murder of the 4th, Brainerd Barnes. Forensic psychiatrist Dr. Park Dietz consulted on the case of serial killer Joel Rifkin, another Long Island resident, and spoke to us about Heuermann's arrest.
The most common sexual motive for serial killings is sexual sadism. Becoming the god to that victim is the offender's primal goal.
The architect's neighbors on First Avenue in Massapequa Park were stunned that the hulking Heuermann hid the alleged crimes for so long. A map showing Wantagh Parkway near his home reveals how easily he could have driven to Ocean Parkway, close to the Jones Beach Exchange.
He grew up there as a kid with his parents.
Many thought that Heuermann's house was an eyesore. Detectives said they found hundreds of guns locked in a vault in the house, and fairly soon they were searching storage facilities nearby.
Are there body parts or things that we need to take a look at? Are there trophies of some of the victims that, unfortunately, that he stored in that location?
The crucial break in the case had come last year from a new interview with Amber Costello's roommate and pimp, who said that John had come to their house in Babylon on September 1st, 2010, the day before she vanished, and the client, described as ogre-like, was driving a green Chevy Avalanche.
6 weeks later, on March 14th, 2022, the name Rex Heuermann was first mentioned as a suspect in the Gilgo case.
You know, folks, we've done a show on that, on how they had this information back in 2010, and it took until 2013, or excuse me, till 2012, for them to discover this Chevy Avalanche and to come up with the name of Rex Heuermann and to come up with the burner cell phones and connect all the dots to Massapequa Park and to Manhattan. So that's one of the disturbing things that we hope will be part of this investigation. That will be investigated also. How did that happen? How did they have this information, but yet it wasn't acted upon for all those years?
Not only did he own the Chevy Avalanche, but he matched the physical description.
During a Google search of old maps, investigators discovered a green Chevy Avalanche parked outside Heuermann's house in plain sight. And now a former escort is coming forward to say she talked about true crime investigations with Rex Heuermann during a date. Long Island stylist Nicole Brass appeared on Cuomo.
And I said, well, have you heard of the Gilgo Beach murders? Like, his body language kind of changed, and like his eyes were like as if he was in a different place, like he was picturing it all over again. Like, it was weird. He almost kind of made the victims like seem like people who didn't matter.
Heuermann's wife has now filed divorce papers, which were not contested. The wife's sister, Johanna, spoke briefly to Pix 11 News from her Long Island home.
We don't know anything. We're hearing about most of it on the news ourselves, so we're just going to refrain from saying anything.
And there are more revelations about the people Rex Heuermann did work for. Aside from contracts with New York City and Target, documents reveal he received $200,000 from former President Donald Trump's company to renovate office space at a downtown building. The revelations just reinforce investigators' beliefs that the serial killer suspect lived two lives. Dr. Dietz said he would like to know if the burly Heuermann was bullied in his childhood. Law enforcement wants to know if the suspect is connected to 6 other Ocean Parkway victims, some of them dismembered.
It could be that they are all linked or that some are linked. It would be quite a coincidence to have another serial killer working in the same area at the same time, but it's happened before.
Families of the victims who lived in upstate cities or out of state had to fight to get the attention of law enforcement because the women were categorized as sex workers. Relatives of the victims often held vigils here and demanded they get treated with dignity. Now they've seen the face of the accused killer.
He just looks like a cold monster. And in his eyes, I mean, you can just see that it's like a sociopath.
Victim Amber Costello's aunt watched the serial killer case unfold from her home in North Carolina. Other families somberly followed District Attorney Ray Tierney into court when the gruesome indictment was unsealed. One of them was the younger sister of victim Alyssa Barthelemy. The sister was just 15, according to family, when the accused killer made taunting phone calls in 2009 using Barthelomy's cell phone.
That was one of the cell phones that we are hoping that they recovered during this search warrant at his home. If they recover that Maureen Brainerd Barnes' cell phone and Melissa Barthelomy's cell phone, it is such powerful evidence that I don't know how an attorney could thwart that evidence.
This Melissa's little sister. That's how he started out the conversation. Was this Melissa's little sister? And she answered yes.
Megan Waterman's daughter was just 3 when her mother disappeared.
Doubtless.
This surveillance shows Megan Waterman, just 22, in the early hours of June 6, 2010, shortly before she left the Holiday Inn Express in Hauppauge, Long Island, to meet a client. Prosecutors say that John was architect Rex Heuermann, based on calls from a burner phone he allegedly bought the day before Waterman met her demise.
And for each of the murders, he got an individual burner phone, and he used that to communicate with the victims.
Amber Costello, 27, was the last of the Gilgo 4 to disappear. Court papers indicate her roommate and pimp tried to act like an outraged boyfriend when the suspect allegedly showed up at their Babylon rental on September 1st, 2010, looking for sexual services.
They wanted to rip him off.
Heuermann allegedly.
See, no one else would say that. And Mary Murphy, she said it. And you just heard Police Commissioner Rodney Harrison reiterate that this was a rip. It was a planned ripoff. And David Schaller used to live with Amber Costello, whether he was a pimp or whatever. And they both had, in 2010, serious drug issues. And so when Rex Heuermann came to the house, they had designed a way to rip him off without performing or without leaving with him. And they took his money, and then he took off being threatened by David Schaller. So Mary Murphy reported that exactly, and you saw Police Commissioner Rodney Harrison say the same exact thing.
Allegedly texted Amber Costello saying, "That was not so nice. Do I get credit for next time?" Her roommate watched her leaving the house the next day, taking nothing with her.
He was really worried because when she went out the door, she didn't take her purse or her cell phone. He was like, "You're forgetting them." And she said, "I'm not going to need them."
You know, as my frequent flyer co-host, Mike Geary, Professor Michael Geary, retired NYPD Sergeant Michael Geary, says the fact that Rex Heuermann planned that the way he did, A, it's premeditated, and B, it's something that Professor Geary says all the time, it's consciousness of guilt. He knew what he was going to do and premeditatedly planned it because he was trying to prevent himself from getting caught.
Amber Costello's body was discovered 3 months later with the Gilgo 4 on Ocean Parkway.
He's huge. None of these girls stood a chance against him.
The Long Island serial killer investigation involved painstaking phone analysis, the search for better DNA technology, and the hope that a tip would come in that would change everything. The Gilgo Beach Task Force tracked Rex Heuermann for more than a year with physical and digital surveillance. A 32-page court affidavit claimed prosecutors had images of Heuermann buying extra minutes on his burner phones, hoping they weren't traceable. But experts did eventually trace his burners, they say, and some victims' phones to cell sites near Heuermann's place of work in Midtown Manhattan and 4 cell towers in Massapequa Park that were close to his home.
And that was mapped out. That was called the box.
It wasn't easy, Mary. Very, very difficult work.
Once Heuermann was identified as the person of interest,
we executed over 300 subpoenas, search warrants pertaining to this individual.
That allowed the task.
You know, folks, there was 2 reasons why they took this case down when they did. Reason number one was there were over 300 subpoenas. And because of that amount of subpoenas, they feared the security of the case. In essence, subpoenaing a company that may tell the person who's the target that the police are looking into you. That can happen. And the other part B was that he was still using burner phones to contact escorts. So those were the two reasons that they took the case down when they did. And it was probably a timely reason, and it made a lot of sense because they didn't want to have any more victims in this case than they already had.
Task force to check Heuermann's phone records and his online activity.
In a 14-month period, he had over 200 searches pertaining to the Gilgo investigation.
And by using fake online profiles, Heuermann also allegedly searched for 6 subjects like torture porn and child porn.
He's a demon. He's an animal. He's just somebody that should not be around other human beings.
The affidavit revealed Heuermann was nailed with his own DNA and that of his wife. After collecting 11 bottles from the family trash in 2022, investigators swabbed them for genetic material. Lab results this year indicated female hairs found on 3 victims' bodies likely came from female DNA in the Heuermann household or car. The linchpin that sealed up the case happened when cops snatched a pizza box that Rex Heuermann allegedly tossed in a trash can near his Midtown office. When scientists tested the DNA recovered from the uneaten pizza crust, they say it matched DNA from the burlap used to wrap victim Megan Waterman.
When we come back.
That is such powerful evidence that it matched DNA on the burlap. And I believe 3 hairs were discovered on the victims that belonged to Asa Ellerup, Rex Heuermann's wife. And one of the hairs belonged to Rex Heuermann. So incredible evidence, incredibly powerful evidence. Is it, as earlier when we first started this show today, is it circumstantial? Yeah, it's circumstantial. But as I've described a million times on this show, sometimes circumstantial evidence is extremely powerful when it's piled up high and you have a lot of it. And that's what they have in this case. So, folks, I actually went longer than I intended to. I want to thank everyone for tuning in today. It started out with just, the fact that Rex Heuermann's wife thinks that she should be given his guns because she needs the money. And I don't believe that a judge is going to release those weapons to her anytime soon. The other thing is on September 27th is the next hearing for Rex Heuermann. Potentially he won't be at it. It's probably a procedural hearing dealing with discovery and procedure in regards to this case. Next court appearance. Folks, I'm Bill Cannon from Police Off the Cuff, Real Crime Stories. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Have a great rest of your day, and God bless.
One episode just ain't enough.